Shalom and Swadikap. I would like to thank each one of you for watching this online event and encourage you later on to share it with your family, your friends, and your colleagues. During the Second World War, the Nazi regime annihilated systematically, in cold blood, no less than 6 million Jews, including more than 1 million children. This genocide brought us face to face with the extent of man's capacity for inhumanity to his fellow men. Today, we are gathered here in order to take a few moments from our busy life and daily routines to remember and reflect about the Holocaust and its lessons that should have been learned. While the Holocaust was a unique tragedy for the Jewish people, its lessons are universal. There is a universal chilling lesson that all of us have to remember. We should not let our prime instinct of hating those who are different from us to control our behavior. But did we, mankind, really learn that lesson? Sadly, today, we still experience the evils of bigotry and blind hate. As we stand here today, anti-Semitism is on the rise, especially in Europe. Jews are still targeted all over the world, and likewise other minorities, be it on a religious or race or gender base, are persecuted and discriminated for no other reason except of being different. The real issue, which I believe should really worry us, is the lack of knowledge, and I dare say the ignorance that exists around the world about history in general and the Nazi era and the Holocaust in particular. A deficient knowledge of history of the human race is a perfect breeding ground for racism, discrimination, and hate, and maybe for the next genocide. In today's world, where everyone is a potential newsmaker, and with the social media supplying the perfect platform for instant dissemination of content, extremism, unfortunately, seems to be carrying the day. However, it is my view that education and learning are extremely powerful tools, and that families, schools, and universities can still rise to the challenge of teaching history and values. The giant tech platforms and social media should also be mindful and responsible as to avoid encouraging extremism, blood libels, and conspiracy theories. As hard and as challenging as it is, the only effective antidote to racism, anti-Semitism, and other forms of discrimination is education, education, and education. Thank you. Kap Kum Kap.
Today, we honor the memory of the 6 million Jews and millions of others who were systematically murdered in the Holocaust by the Nazis and their collaborators. This year's anniversary takes place under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has revealed long-standing fractures and injustices in our societies and contributed to a resurgence in anti-Semitism and xenophobia. The Holocaust was the culmination of 2 millennia of discrimination, attacks, expulsions, and periodic mass killings of Jews. It should have ended anti-Semitism for good, but it did not. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, remains alive and well. Today, white supremacists and neo-Nazis are resurgent, organizing and recruiting across borders, intensifying their efforts to deny, distort, and rewrite history, including the Holocaust. The COVID-19 pandemic has given them new opportunities to target minorities based on religion, race, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation, disability, and immigration status. We must make urgent joint efforts to stop them. As we consider the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, we must address the fragilities and gaps exposed by the pandemic and strengthen our mutual bonds based on our common humanity. This year must be a year of healing. Healing from the pandemic and healing our broken societies in which hatred has all too easily taken root. As we remember those who died in the Holocaust and honor the survivors, our best tribute is the creation of a world of equality, justice, and dignity for all.
Zvi Josef Herschel was born on December 29, 1942, in Zwolle. About 800 people lived in the Jewish community of Zwolle. At dawn on May 10, 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands. The Dutch army surrendered just 4 days later. Before the German invasion in early 1940, some 140,000 Jews lived in the Netherlands, representing close to 1.6% of the population. During the Holocaust, nearly 105,000 of them were murdered. Following the occupation, the Netherlands imposed an anti-Jewish policy in which Jewish civil servants were suspended from work. A meticulous list of the Jewish population was drawn up. It was forbidden to publish Jewish newspapers, and steps were taken to further oppress the Jews economically, culturally, and socially. The second half of 1941 saw an escalation of anti-Jewish policies. In May 1941, around 80,000 Jews lived in Amsterdam. By that spring, the Nazis designated those streets of Amsterdam where many Jews were living. Later on, some parts of the city of Amsterdam were called the Jewish Quarter. From 1942 onwards, all Jews in the Netherlands were ordered to move to the Jewish Quarter of Amsterdam.
I was born in the darkest time of the war in Holland. My parents were forced to live in the ghetto of Amsterdam just before the transportation to the concentration camp in Holland, Westerbork, and there was no way out. They tried, but it was impossible. And my parents decided to entrust me to non-Jewish people, and my father contacted the wife of his boss, Mrs. Schwenke, and she arrived in the ghetto of Amsterdam together with a 17-year-old daughter. In April 1943, she and her 17-year-old daughter, Christine or Tine Schwenke, came to the ghetto of Amsterdam, and they came to get me out of this terrible situation. Tine Schwenke, the 17-year-old daughter, took me from my parents in her arms, acting as a young mother, and both went back to Oosterbeek. Oosterbeek is in the east of Holland, near Arnhem.
In 1942, the Germans prepared to expel all the Jews from the Netherlands to extermination camps. Jews were rounded up from Amsterdam's various districts and then transported to the Vught and Westerbork camps in the Netherlands. Between 1942 and 1944, the Westerbork transit camp was used to transport Jews who had been deported from the Netherlands, mainly to extermination camps in Eastern Europe. Approximately 105,000 Jews were deported from Westerbork, most of them to Auschwitz-Birkenau and Sobibor, and a minority to Theresienstadt and Bergen-Belsen. Nico and Ami Herschel. Zwe's parents were transported to the Dutch transit camp of Westerbork in June 1943. 1 month later, they were transported from Westerbork to the Sobibor death camp. His mother was 24, his father 27 years old, when they were murdered at Sobibor on July 23, 1943. Almost the entire family perished in the Holocaust.
First of all, I will emphasize the enormous love my parents had for me to entrust me to non-Jewish people. I was the firstborn and I was about 4 months old. You cannot imagine what it means for parents to give away your child, and especially not in a situation as it was at that time in the Second World War. So in their home, it was very dangerous because Mr. Schwenke was taken hostage with other 250 well-known Dutch politicians and other people. And Mrs. Schwenke realized that it was dangerous. So she went to the friend of her husband, Mr. Willem de Jong, who was the head of the resistance in Oosterbeek. He came immediately and he said, it's too dangerous, and he took the little boy, me, to his home. When I arrived in his home, the home of Mr. and Mr. de Jong, Mrs. de Jong, Martje de Jong, said, this boy is not going to leave my house. And that's the way I stayed there for the whole period of the Second World War. They had already 5 children of their own, and they had another Jewish teenager in hiding in the same house. The risk the people took for taking in Jews to put them in hiding was as high as to be a Jew in those days. And the fate of them was exactly the same. Not only for one person, but the whole family. Thinking of this period, and what I remember is that I was taken care of with love. I was taken in as their own child. Also, my siblings were my brothers and sisters. They were religious people. They were Protestant. We went to church. Even today I know the prayers. And every day the Bible, the Old Testament, came after lunch on the table, and there was always a chapter, a story about what happens that day or this week about the Bible. And I can remember that in September 1944, the glider landed around our house. But soon after, they started to fight, and also in our street. So we went down into the cellar, into the basement of the house. And there we were waiting what was going on in front of the house. All of a sudden there was a big bang. The house was hit by a bomb, collapsed, got on fire, and we got out of the house. It was a terrible moment in my life. I still remember that. The screaming of my sisters. Sometimes, you know, I dream about it. But we got out unharmed, and for about 2 weeks we were living from basement to basement, and then afterwards we were evacuated to Spakenburg. Spakenburg is in the vicinity of Amsterdam. In May 1945, Holland was liberated, and I remember the Canadians in their jeeps coming up the street, and I was sitting on the shoulders of my father, and everyone was happy and singing and dancing in the streets with a lot of flags, Dutch flags.
In May 1945, with the signing of the German capitulation, the Netherlands was liberated from German occupation. After the liberation of the Netherlands, the only survivor of the Herschel family, Zvi's grandmother Rebecca, came to take out the boy from his rescuer's family. She wanted to raise her grandchild in a Jewish home.
On the spot, I lost my family. My father, my mother, my siblings. It was terrible. Not only that, when I came to Rotterdam, where she used to live, I had to change my name. My name was Henkie de Jong. I was a part of the de Jong family. And all of a sudden, no, your name is Herman. I couldn't grab it. On top of it, it was forbidden to have contact with my family, with my parents, with my mother. And I had to pray in a different way, in a different language, which I didn't understand at all. And I had to eat kosher. My whole youth, till I was 18, was very difficult. I felt alone. Well, I had to teach myself. And I can say that I'm lucky that I found a way.
At the age of 8, Zvi found a box with the family papers his father had sent with him as a baby into hiding. His grandmother had kept them all those years. Zvi started to reconstruct his tragic family story. He learned about his father's deep dedication to the land of Israel and developed the same attitude, love for the land of Israel and the wish to live there as a free people.
My parents were both Zionists, already in their teens. My father wrote 10 diaries, and there's no page where he doesn't write anything about Zionism as such. And his dream was that he is going to make Aliyah together with my mother. And unfortunately, it never came out. And it was remarkable that a straight line between his thoughts about living as a Jew in the diaspora and my thoughts as being a Zionist and wanted to live in Israel. I could have never expressed myself much better than after reading one of the sentences of my father's diary. A people without a country doesn't have a future. And I'm happy that I followed actually the steps of my parents.
As a teenager, Zvi joined the Jewish youth movement B'nai Akiva. Zvi married Annette in 1965. Zvi and Annette have 2 daughters, Mirla, born in 1965, and Natalie, born in 1967. In 1986, Zvi and his family decided to fulfill their dream and immigrate to Israel. They came from Amsterdam to the coast of Haifa on their own yacht in order to become citizens of Israel. The journey took them several weeks. Zvi and Annette built their home in Tel Mond. Here, they live close to their daughter Natalie and their grandchildren. Throughout the years, Zvi maintained a warm connection with the de Jong family. Whenever he visited the Netherlands, he also went to see the family that saved his life. The de Jong family and the Schwenke family were honored as righteous among the nations. Their names are inscribed in Yad Vashem's garden of the righteous among the nations.
Some years ago, I went to Yom HaShoah here in Tel Mond, to the primary school of my grandson. And there were over 600 youngsters from the school in white shirts. Today, now, it was so emotional. I never had this feeling of to be together. I never had this beautiful youth, what they have. To relate my story to my life is that it's something unbelievable that my parents with all their love for their child, for me, entrusted me to strangers. We cannot imagine what went through their heads the moment they made a decision, the moment they handed over their baby, their firstborn baby, to strangers. There are so many things that influence your life. And there are always two possibilities. You can go to the left and you can go to the right. But what is the right direction? The right direction is something what your heart tells you. We mustn't forget the past, we have to learn from it. And to stop discrimination. If we want to live in a better world, we start now not to discriminate anymore. If we want to live in a better world for the next generation to come, we have to do that.
Stille, lo mir schweigen, vor ihm wachsen do. Soben sie verpflanzt die Sonne im grünen See zum Blau. Sphären wegen zu. Es wird kein Weg zurück, ist der Tat wo verschwunden und mit ihm das Glück. Stille Kind meins, wein nicht deutzer, selbst nicht kein Gewinn. Unserem Glück willen soll ihm sei wie nicht verstehen. Soben bräg es euch nicht Amen, soben euch es fieses zusammen, nur zu unser Bein kein bissel Schein, kein bissel Schein. Frühling auf'n Land gekommen und uns Herbst gebracht, ist der Tag ein voll mit Blumen Goldig scheint der Herbst auf Stammen, blüht in uns der Zahn, bleibt verjosemt wo am Name, Kind gejaff bonar. Wie die Vilje geschmiedet Teug gejogt in Pein, ziehen Krie seist du Glitte, ist in Jammerein. Zwerd der Heuschreck Wutzeranen, von der finster leichten Sonne, Reiter, komm geschwind, dich ruft dein Kind, dich ruft dein Kind. Stille, stille, Quellen, Qualen, uns in Herz arum, bis der Teuer wird nicht fallen, sei mir Musen stumm. Frei nicht Kind sich, setzt dein Schmeichel, jetzt vor uns verrat. Send dem Frühling soll der Säune wie in Herbst ablatt. Soll der Qual sich ruhen,